Far beyond the edge of human space, deep inside a region no telescope on Earth had ever mapped, a message reached every ship in the Osran Dominion. The message was short. It said that the time for talking was over. Humanity had refused to bow. Now the strongest fleet the Dominion had ever built would sail to Earth and end the matter for good. The order came from the High Council, a group of old, tired leaders who had ruled the Dominion for 200 years. They had watched small fights break out along the border for decades. Human ships had stopped Dominion patrols. Human colonies had grown faster than expected. Reports called humans stubborn, unpredictable, and hard to read. The Council saw this as a problem that needed to be solved once and for all. They chose Grand Admiral Tarkis Vaughn to lead the attack. Vaughn was known across the Dominion as a careful and confident commander. He had never lost a major battle. His flagship, a massive dreadnought named the Absolute, was the pride of the Dominion Navy. It carried more weapons than most human colonies had ever seen in one place. When Vaughn received his orders, he did not celebrate. He simply nodded and began his work. He called every shipyard under his command and told them to prepare. Within weeks, hundreds of warships gathered in open space near the Dominion capital. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, carriers, and support ships lined up in perfect rows, stretching farther than the eye could see. It was the largest fleet ever assembled by the Dominion, built for one single purpose: to force humanity into total surrender. Vaughn stood in front of his senior officers before the fleet departed. He told them this would not be a fair fight. Humanity had one home system, a handful of colonies, and a small navy compared to the Dominion's endless resources. He told them the humans might resist for a short time, but resistance would be pointless. The Dominion had crushed larger empires before. Humanity, in his eyes, was simply the next name on a long list. Some of the younger officers were nervous. They had heard stories about human ships fighting in ways that broke every rule of Dominion strategy. Humans did not always retreat when they should. They took risks that no sane commander would take. But Vaughn dismissed these worries. He said fear was for those who did not understand real power. The Dominion had faced strange enemies before, and every one of them had eventually knelt. The fleet left Dominion space in a long, slow procession. Ships passed silently through the dark, moving toward a distant yellow star that human maps called Sol. Vaughn spent much of the journey studying old reports about Earth. He read about human history, their wars, their inventions, and their strange ability to work together even when divided by language and culture. None of it worried him. To Vaughn, human history was full of chaos, not strength. As the fleet crossed into the outer edges of known space, sensors on distant listening posts caught the first signs of movement. A wave of ships, larger than anything recorded before, was heading straight for the Sol system. The news spread quickly through Dominion channels, and soon it reached neutral trade routes as well. Word of the invasion began to travel from system to system, carried by merchants, scouts, and curious travelers who had never expected to witness something this large. Vaughn did not care about rumors. His focus stayed on the mission ahead. He ordered his officers to prepare final battle plans. Scouts would move first to confirm human defenses. Then the main fleet would advance in a wide formation designed to surround the system and cut off any escape. If Earth's defenders tried to resist, they would be crushed before they could regroup. If they surrendered early, Vaughn was prepared to offer terms, though he doubted humanity would take that option. Days passed as the fleet moved closer. The crew aboard the Absolute grew quiet, focused, and disciplined. Every officer knew this campaign would be remembered in Dominion history books for generations. Vaughn walked through the ship often, checking systems, speaking briefly with his crew, and reviewing star charts that marked the path to Earth. On the final night before reaching the system, Vaughn stood alone in a quiet observation room and looked out at the stars ahead. Somewhere beyond that darkness was a small, blue world that had somehow managed to survive against every empire that had tried to conquer it before. He found it strange that such a young species could cause so much trouble. But he also found comfort in numbers. No single world, no matter how stubborn its people were, could stand against a fleet of this size. He turned away from the window and returned to his duties. The fleet was close now. Soon, the might of the Dominion would arrive at the edge of Sol system, ready to force humanity into submission once and for all. Vaughn believed, without doubt, that the battle ahead would be short. He had no idea that the coming days would challenge everything he thought he knew about power, about war, and about the small, determined species waiting for him at the edge of their home system. A research satellite orbiting the outer edge of the solar system picked up the signal first. The satellite was not built to search for warships. Its normal job was to study comets passing through the outer dark. But when its sensors detected a mass larger than a small moon moving steadily toward Earth, it sent an automatic warning back to Mission Control. Within minutes, the warning reached the Unified Defense Council, the group responsible for protecting Earth and its colonies. At first, some officials thought it was a sensor error. Nothing that large had ever approached the solar system before. But new readings kept arriving, each one confirming the last. A fleet, far bigger than anything humanity had ever built, was heading straight for home. The council gathered for an emergency meeting within the hour. Screens filled the room, showing endless rows of unknown ships moving in tight formation. Analysts worked quickly to estimate the fleet's size and strength. The numbers were troubling. If even a small part of that fleet reached Earth's orbit, it could overwhelm every defense humanity had built over the past century. Military leaders argued about what to do. Some wanted to gather every available ship and form one massive defense line near Earth. Others said that would only delay the inevitable, since human numbers were far smaller than the approaching fleet. A few quiet voices in the room suggested something different, something that had been planned for years but never used. After hours of debate, the council reached a decision that shocked almost everyone present. Instead of sending Earth's entire home fleet to meet the invaders, they would send only one ship. A single cruiser, named the UNS Halcyon, would travel to the edge of the solar system and meet the incoming fleet there. The order confused many officers who did not know the full plan. Sending one ship against an armada of that size seemed like a death sentence. But a small group within the council understood the real reason behind the decision. For years, engineers and scientists had quietly built something hidden throughout the solar system, a project few outside a small circle knew anything about. The Halcyon was not going out alone to fight. It was going out to lead. Captain Daniel Reyes received his orders early in the morning, delivered directly by a council officer instead of through normal channels. Reyes was known among his peers as calm under pressure, a commander who thought carefully before acting. When he read the mission details, he did not react with fear or excitement. He simply asked a single question: was the system ready? The officer nodded and told him everything had been tested and prepared for this exact moment. Reyes gathered his senior crew soon after. Commander Alice Monroe, his first officer, listened carefully as the mission was explained. She had served with Reyes for years and trusted his judgment completely, even when the odds looked impossible. Chief Engineer Robert Kim reviewed technical readouts showing the full scope of what the Halcyon could access once it reached position. Lieutenant Grace Hall prepared communication systems that would need to stay steady under intense pressure. Dr. Susan Wells, a diplomat assigned to the ship, packed her materials quietly, hoping her skills would not be needed but ready in case they were. News of the mission eventually reached the public, though only in simple terms. People across Earth learned that a massive alien fleet was approaching and that a single human ship had been sent to meet it. Reactions varied widely. Some believed the government had lost its mind. Others trusted that military leaders knew something the public did not. Streets grew quieter that evening as families gathered around screens, watching updates about the approaching threat. Aboard the Halcyon, final preparations continued through the night. The ship was smaller than many people expected for such an important mission, sleek and fast rather than heavily armored like a typical warship. But its systems held secrets far beyond its size. Robert Kim worked closely with his engineering team, confirming that every connection to the hidden network scattered across the solar system was active and stable. Before departure, Reyes addressed his crew one final time. He spoke simply, without dramatic speeches. He told them their mission was not to win a battle through firepower alone. It was to buy time, gather information, and trigger a plan that had taken years to build. He reminded them that Earth's survival did not depend on matching the enemy ship for ship, but on using intelligence and preparation instead of raw numbers. As the Halcyon left Earth's orbit and began its journey toward the edge of the solar system, millions watched news coverage in silence. The ship grew smaller on screen until it disappeared into the darkness of space, heading toward an enemy fleet that outnumbered it by hundreds to one. Nobody watching knew exactly what would happen next. But somewhere far ahead, a plan built quietly over many years was about to be tested for the first time. The scout ships of the Dominion fleet reached the outer edge of the Sol system first. Their sensors swept ahead, searching for signs of a massive human defense line, something to match the size of the approaching armada. Instead, they found something strange. A single ship sat quietly in open space, waiting. Reports of the discovery reached Grand Admiral Tarkis Vaughn within minutes. He read the numbers twice before believing them. One cruiser, not a fleet, not even a small defense group. Just one ship, positioned directly in the path of the entire Dominion armada. Vaughn assumed it was either a trick or a mistake. No commander in his right mind would send one ship to face hundreds. He ordered the main fleet to slow its approach while he studied the situation further. Sensors confirmed there was no hidden fleet nearby, no cloaked ships waiting behind asteroids, nothing but empty space and one lone cruiser holding its position. Vaughn found the sight almost insulting. After decades of conflict, after years of careful planning, humanity's response was a single ship standing in open space. Aboard the Halcyon, the crew watched their own sensors fill with contacts. Ship after ship appeared on the display, stretching across a wide section of space until the entire screen looked like a field of stars that should not exist. Lieutenant Grace Hall kept her voice steady as she read out updated numbers to the bridge. Commander Alice Monroe stood beside Captain Daniel Reyes, watching the same overwhelming picture without saying a word. Reyes studied the formation carefully. He had trained for this exact moment for years, though nothing could fully prepare a person for seeing an enemy fleet this large in person. He ordered the crew to hold position and wait. There was no reason to move first. Every second the fleet spent studying them was a second closer to the moment their plan would begin. A communication request soon reached the Halcyon. Vaughn appeared on screen, calm and composed, expecting a quick and simple exchange. He told Reyes that resistance was pointless and that the Dominion offered one chance for surrender. He expected fear, or perhaps a desperate plea for mercy. Instead, Reyes answered in a steady voice, telling Vaughn that Earth had no intention of surrendering and that the Dominion fleet was welcome to test that decision if it wished. Vaughn found the response almost amusing. He ended the transmission and ordered a probing strike, a small group of ships meant to test human defenses and remind the lone cruiser of the danger it faced. A wing of fighters and light escorts broke away from the main formation and moved toward the Halcyon at high speed. What happened next surprised the attacking group. As the fighters closed in, the Halcyon's defense systems activated with precision that seemed far beyond what a single cruiser should possess. Point defense weapons tracked incoming fire with near-perfect accuracy. Decoy signals confused targeting systems on several enemy ships, causing them to strike empty space instead of their intended target. Within minutes, 3 escort ships were disabled, their engines destroyed by carefully placed strikes that avoided unnecessary destruction. Vaughn watched the reports with growing irritation rather than concern. He told his officers it was simply advanced but limited technology, nothing that could stop a fleet of this size for long. He ordered the main force to advance deeper into the system, splitting into multiple groups to surround Earth from different directions. This was standard Dominion strategy, designed to prevent any defender from focusing all resources on a single approach. Aboard the Halcyon, Robert Kim monitored the fleet's movement closely. As Dominion ships spread out across the system, they moved exactly where years of quiet planning had expected them to go. Kim reported the positioning to Reyes with quiet satisfaction, though he kept his voice professional and calm. Everything was proceeding according to plan, even if the enemy did not yet understand what that plan truly was. Reyes ordered the crew to maintain their position near the edge of the system, watching carefully as the Dominion fleet moved further inward. Dr. Susan Wells stayed near the communication station, ready in case another dialogue opened with Vaughn. She understood, like the rest of the crew, that this stage of the mission was not about winning a direct battle. It was about patience, timing, and letting the enemy fully commit to their approach. As the Dominion fleet spread wider across the system, passing near quiet asteroid fields and dark, seemingly abandoned stations. None of their sensors detected anything unusual. To Dominion eyes, the system looked just as expected, a small human home base, one aggressive but ultimately weak cruiser, and empty space beyond that. Vaughn allowed himself a moment of confidence as he watched his ships fan out toward Earth. In his mind, the campaign was already moving toward its expected conclusion. He had no way of knowing that every ship now spreading through the system was moving directly into position for a trap that had waited, silent and patient, for years. Hidden inside a quiet, ordinary-looking asteroid, far from any major trade route, a system that had stayed silent for 11 years finally woke up. Deep inside the rock, machinery hummed to life. Sensors extended outward. Weapon systems, long dormant, began drawing power for the first time since their installation. The asteroid was not alone. Across the solar system, dozens more like it stirred in the same quiet way, joined by hidden platforms on distant moons, old mining stations that had appeared abandoned for years, and small drone clusters tucked away in shadowed corners of space. Robert Kim watched the activation sequence from his station aboard the Halcyon, checking each connection point as it came online. Years of careful engineering, funded quietly and built without public announcement, were finally being put to use. The network had been designed with one purpose in mind: to turn the entire solar system into a defense the Dominion fleet would never expect. Kim confirmed each system was stable before reporting the full activation to Captain Daniel Reyes. As the Dominion fleet spread further into the system, following standard encirclement tactics, ships began entering zones that had once seemed empty and harmless. A group of cruisers passing near a quiet cluster of asteroids suddenly found themselves surrounded by precisely placed mines, invisible until the moment they detonated. Another group patrolling near an old, apparently abandoned station discovered too late that the station's defense systems were very much active, firing with accuracy that suggested careful planning rather than random chance. Reports of losses began reaching Grand Admiral Tarkis Vaughn from multiple directions at once. At first, he assumed the incidents were isolated, perhaps the result of old human defense systems left behind and forgotten. But as more reports arrived, showing damage across several separate fleet groups spread throughout the system, Vaughn realized something far more coordinated was happening. This was not random old technology. It was a network, and it was responding to the fleet's movement with clear intention. He ordered his officers to trace the source of the coordinated attacks. Communication analysts eventually noticed something unusual. Every hidden system that activated seemed to respond shortly after the Halcyon adjusted its position or sent a brief signal. The lone cruiser sitting quietly at the edge of the system was not simply observing the battle. It was directing it. Vaughn found this discovery deeply unsettling, though he did not show it openly to his crew. The single ship he had dismissed as insignificant was, in fact, the key to an elaborate defense system built specifically to counter an invasion of this scale. He ordered the fleet to regroup and consolidate, pulling ships back from their spread formation to reduce the number of separate targets vulnerable to further ambush. Aboard the Halcyon, the crew watched the results of years of preparation unfold in real time. Lieutenant Grace Hall monitored enemy communications, noting the confusion spreading through Dominion channels as commanders struggled to understand what was happening. Commander Alice Monroe tracked fleet movement patterns, helping Kim adjust which parts of the hidden network to activate next based on where enemy ships were regrouping. Reyes remained focused throughout, aware that the plan's success depended on patience and precision rather than aggressive attacks. He reminded his crew that the goal was never to destroy the entire Dominion fleet through direct combat. It was to make the cost of invasion so high that continuing the attack would become impossible to justify. Every disabled ship, every damaged group, added weight to that argument. As Dominion forces pulled back into a tighter formation, the defense network adjusted its approach as well. Instead of scattered ambushes, remaining hidden systems focused on slowing the fleet's retreat, disabling engines and weapons rather than attempting to destroy ships outright. Kim explained to Reyes that this was intentional. Total destruction would create endless hatred and a desire for revenge. Disabling ships without excessive loss of life sent a different message, one meant to discourage further conflict rather than fuel it. Despite the growing damage, Vaughn refused to consider retreat. Pulling back now, after suffering losses from what still appeared to be a single ship and an old defense network, would be seen as a humiliating failure across the entire Dominion. He gathered his remaining core fleet around the Absolute, preparing for a direct, concentrated push toward Earth itself. If he could reach the planet quickly and force a fast resolution, he believed the campaign could still be called a success. Dr. Susan Wells, watching the unfolding situation from the Halcyon, quietly noted that Vaughn's decision matched exactly what the mission planners had expected. A cornered commander, unwilling to accept defeat gracefully, often made his most predictable move by concentrating his remaining strength for one final push. As the Dominion's damaged fleet began forming into a tighter, more direct formation aimed at Earth, the Halcyon adjusted its own position, ready to meet that final push directly, at the very heart of the trap that had been years in the making. Aboard the Absolute, warning lights flickered across damaged sections of the ship for the first time in Grand Admiral Tarkey's Vaughn's long career. Reports continued arriving from across the fleet, listing disabled engines, destroyed weapon arrays, and crews working desperately to restore power to critical systems. Vaughn read each report carefully, refusing to let frustration show on his face, though the numbers painted a clear picture. What remained of his once massive invasion force was now a fraction of its original strength, gathered tightly around his flagship for one final push toward Earth. He called his senior officers together for a short briefing. Retreat was not mentioned as an option, though a few officers clearly wanted to suggest it. Vaughn explained that pulling back now, after such losses, would only invite further attacks from the hidden defense network they had already suffered under. Their best chance, he argued, was to move quickly and directly toward Earth, using their remaining firepower in one decisive strike before the defense system could regroup and respond again. The remaining Dominion ships formed a tight defensive formation around the Absolute, moving as one unit through the system. Sensors detected no further ambushes as they advanced, which Vaughn took as a small sign of hope. Perhaps the hidden network had exhausted its resources. Perhaps this final push could still succeed. He allowed himself a brief moment of cautious optimism as Earth's outline grew larger on his display screens. Aboard the Halcyon, Captain Daniel Reyes watched the same formation approach on his own screens. Commander Alice Munro calculated an intercept course, adjusting speed and angle to place the cruiser directly in the path of the advancing group. Robert Kim confirmed that the remaining portions of the defense network were ready to support one final, coordinated effort, though most of its resources had already been used during the earlier stages of the battle. Reyes understood that this next confrontation would require more than automated systems. The Halcyon itself, along with its crew, would need to play a direct role in stopping the Absolute and its remaining escorts. He gathered his bridge crew briefly, reminding them of everything they had trained for, and reassured them that the coming fight, while difficult, matched exactly the scenario they had prepared for during years of quiet planning. As the two forces closed the distance, the Halcyon moved into a position that forced the Dominion formation to adjust its approach angle, slowing their advance slightly. Vaughn noticed the movement immediately and ordered a partial group of escorts to break away and eliminate the interfering cruiser once and for all. Several Dominion ships peeled off from the main formation, moving to surround the Halcyon from multiple directions. What followed was not the quick, one-sided destruction Vaughn expected. Reyes used the Halcyon's speed and maneuverability to avoid direct confrontation with multiple ships at once, instead focusing fire on isolated targets within the group. Grace Hall coordinated targeting data with what remained of the defense network, allowing the Halcyon to strike weakened points in enemy shields identified during earlier engagements. One by one, the escort ships sent to destroy the lone cruiser found themselves disabled instead, their weapons and engines damaged by precisely placed strikes. Watching the failed attack from the Absolute, Vaughn realized the situation had grown more serious than he had allowed himself to admit. His remaining force, already weakened, was losing ships faster than expected against a single cruiser that continued to fight with a level of skill and coordination that defied everything he understood about human capability. He made the decision to engage directly, believing his flagship's superior firepower could end the confrontation quickly if he committed fully. The Absolute broke away from its remaining formation and moved directly toward the Halcyon, weapons charging for a decisive strike. Reyes recognized the move immediately and ordered evasive maneuvers, using the flagship's own size and reduced maneuverability against it. As the Absolute attempted to bring its main weapons to bear, the Halcyon slipped through gaps in its defensive coverage, striking critical systems identified through data gathered since the very first encounter at the edge of the system. A precise, coordinated strike targeted the Absolute's primary command systems, causing power throughout key sections of the ship to fail. Weapons fell silent. Navigation systems flickered and shut down. Within moments, the once mighty flagship of the Dominion invasion fleet drifted powerless in space, its command bridge dark except for emergency lighting. Reyes opened a communication channel to the disabled flagship. Vaughn answered, his voice noticeably different from their first exchange, no longer carrying the same confident edge. Reyes spoke calmly, without anger or celebration, telling Vaughn that Earth had never wanted total destruction, only an end to the threat against their home. He offered a simple choice: continue fighting a battle that could not be won, or stand down and allow this conflict to end without further unnecessary loss of life. Vaughn, staring at the ruins of what had once been the greatest fleet his people had ever assembled, understood there was truly only one reasonable answer left to give. Word of what happened at the Sol system did not stay contained for long. Traders passing through neutral space carried fragments of the story to distant stations, and within days, versions of the battle spread across dozens of systems far beyond Dominion territory. Some accounts exaggerated details, describing entire hidden fleets or secret weapons beyond anything real. Others stayed closer to the truth, describing a single human cruiser that had somehow stopped the Dominion's strongest invasion force in its home system. Aboard the Halcyon, the immediate aftermath of the battle required careful, practical work rather than celebration. Grand Admiral Tarkis Vaughn agreed to formal terms, transmitted to what remained of his fleet, ordering all surviving ships to stand down and prepare for withdrawal. Captain Daniel Reyes worked closely with Dr. Susan Wells to finalize an agreement that focused on ending hostilities rather than punishing the defeated fleet further. Wells had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of negotiation, though she had never expected the circumstances to unfold quite this way. Vaughn himself requested a brief meeting aboard the Halcyon before departing with his remaining ships. Reyes agreed, and the two commanders met in a small, quiet room away from the rest of the crew. Vaughn admitted, with obvious difficulty, that he had underestimated humanity completely. He had expected a species divided, disorganized, and easily overwhelmed by superior numbers. Instead, he had found a defense built with patience, discipline, and a willingness to plan decades ahead for a threat that might never have come. Reyes did not respond with pride or mockery. He explained simply that humanity had learned, through difficult experience, that survival sometimes required preparing quietly for the worst while hoping it would never happen. He told Vaughn that Earth had no interest in expanding into Dominion territory or seeking further conflict. Their goal had always been protection, not conquest. Vaughn listened carefully, and for the first time since the campaign began, he seemed to genuinely consider the possibility that his understanding of humanity had been deeply flawed from the start. Back within Dominion space, news of the defeat caused significant unrest among the ruling council. Questions arose about how a single human cruiser, supported by a hidden defense network, had managed to break an armada built specifically to end the conflict permanently. Some council members called for immediate retaliation, demanding a second, even larger fleet be sent to finish what the first had failed to accomplish. Others argued that continuing the conflict against an opponent capable of this level of preparation risked far greater losses than the Dominion could afford. The debate stretched on for weeks, dividing council members into cautious and aggressive factions. Meanwhile, other species across the galaxy who had quietly watched the growing tension between the Dominion and Earth began reconsidering their own positions. Some smaller powers, who had previously avoided contact with humanity out of fear of drawing Dominion attention, now reached out cautiously, curious about a species capable of standing against one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. On Earth, the return of the Halcyon brought quiet relief rather than loud celebration. Reyes and his crew were welcomed home not with grand parades, but with simple gratitude from people who understood how close the outcome could have been. Commander Alice Munro took a short leave to visit family who had watched the entire battle unfold on news broadcasts, uncertain until the very end whether their loved ones aboard the Halcyon would return at all. Robert Kim returned to his engineering work, already reviewing data from the battle to improve the defense network further, aware that peace, even after such a victory, could not be guaranteed to last forever. Lieutenant Grace Hall spent time reviewing communication logs from the battle, preserving records that would later help historians and military planners understand exactly how the defense had worked. Dr. Susan Wells remained involved in ongoing diplomatic discussions, cautiously optimistic that the door had opened for future dialogue between Earth and the Dominion, even if lasting peace would take considerable time to build. Grand Admiral Vaughn returned to Dominion space with the remains of his fleet, carrying with him a report that would change how his people viewed humanity for generations. Rather than describing an easy conquest gone wrong, his official account acknowledged the discipline, patience, and quiet strength behind Earth's defense. It was not the report anyone in the Dominion had expected, and it forced many across the Empire to question assumptions they had held for decades. In the months that followed, Earth's reputation across known space shifted permanently. No longer viewed as a small, disorganized species clinging to survival, humanity became known as a quiet but capable power, one that preferred peace but had proven, without question, that it could not be easily conquered. Reyes and his crew returned to their normal duties, aware that their names would be remembered in history books for years to come, though none of them had set out that day seeking glory. They had simply done what was necessary to protect their home, and in doing so, they had changed how the entire galaxy viewed the small, blue world called Earth.